I want to bring in my panel, Labor MP Ed Husic and Liberal Senator James McGrath. Welcome to both of you.
Good afternoon.
James, you're a Liberal Senator, well, an LNP Senator. Do you think Newstart needs to increase because, well, the Senate just voted to say that it should?
Look, I'm one of those people who thinks the best thing a government can do in relation to Newstart and people on Newstart is actually create jobs. And that's for the government creating the environment for businesses to be able to employ people. So, I don't think Newstart is something that can be increased at the moment. We all acknowledge it's not easy being on Newstart, but it's not meant to be a long-term solution to someone's unemployment problem. The best thing you can do for people who are unemployed is create the environment for them to get a job. At
the moment, I noticed you said. So do you think it should be on the cards at some point, perhaps?
No, I think when I say at the moment, I just mean that generally. The best thing a government can do is create the environment for businesses to create jobs so you can employ people.
Do you share Michael McCormack's view that people should just move to the country if they want a job?
Well, sometimes you look around Australia, there are jobs available in regional Australia. The reason we have a Pacific Islander program, which I support 1,000,000%, is because we can't get people to pick fruit up in Queensland. Sometimes you might have to move to find a job, but the best thing a government can do is create that environment, whether in the cities or in the country, for businesses to grow, and also that means employ people.
Is it embarrassing for the government, for the Senate to pass this motion? The fact that it had a majority from the right, from One Nation, to the left, the Greens, it's quite a chorus of voices now.
Look, in terms of notices of motion, the Senate quite often notices are passed against the government. It happens on a pretty regular basis, so it won't impact upon what the government needs to do, and that's going to grow and create jobs by creating an environment for businesses to grow.
Ed Husic, Labor now says, yes, it should increase, but you can't give me a figure, can you, unless you can. Are you going to be more specific at some point?
Well, I can't give you a figure, and nor should I.
Why not?
I mean, because we need to go through the process of being able to determine, talking with people in the know, out in the community, with business groups who are also in favour of this and others who would be looking at the budget itself to determine what's the best outcome. I don't think we should be plucking figures from the air, but we shouldn't also be, at the same time, accepting a notion, a simplistic line of the day that says the best thing to get people off Newstart is a job. 700,000 Australians, generally speaking, are out of work. 400,000 of them generally are long-term unemployed, which means they haven't been able to find work for quite some time. And it is very hard to find ways to break that cycle of long-term unemployment. And I don't think the government has, the coalition has a plan in terms of improving that. The employment services system under them is not delivering in terms of that getting people out of long-term unemployment into jobs so they're not into Newstart. And the operation of things like the employment services system when it comes to reviewing how Newstart should be changed, this needs to be taken into account in such a review as well. Otherwise, it's just a tokenistic effort if you just pick a figure out of the air and say, just do this.
So, James McGrath, you mentioned that you did think people should perhaps move to the country for jobs. Do you support moves that coerce people to move or try and put limits on their welfare if they're not prepared to move?
Well, I think people need to make a decision themselves in relation to if they want to get ahead in life. Sometimes you do have to move for jobs. My parents had to do it. Other people have had to do it. So I don't particularly like forcing people. So I'm not a supporter of that. But remember, this is a government that's created over 1 million jobs. Actually, I'm going to correct myself. This is a government that's created the environment for 1 million jobs to be created. So this is a government that wants to get on and create jobs through businesses growing. And I think that's the best way to address this issue.
OK, let's park that issue, although I don't think it's going anywhere. Ed Husic, on temporary exclusion orders, if Labor is concerned about the amount of power the bill will put into the hands of the Home Affairs Minister, and this morning you asked how Peter Dutton could be trusted with national security, why would you vote it through? Because that's what ultimately you're planning to do.
Well, because you need to have a system in place to deal with this. I mean, the regime about temporary exclusion orders has been in place in the UK for 4 years, and the government's just got round to doing it. And even then, they couldn't do it in line with what others have been able to do. But you need to have a system in place to manage this. So, I think in the end, we've put forward the arguments that we believe need to be listened to in terms of putting this regime in place, and it'll be interesting to see if the government's regime, in spite of everything that we've been saying to them, in spite of all what people outside in the know have been saying needs to be done to fix this, in spite of the bipartisan committee that said that there were elements of this package needed to be fixed up, if after it gets through, it gets tested, it'll be interesting to see what survives that legal test.
OK, so you're prepared to vote for something that you think will fail a legal test?
No, look, yeah, OK, cute.
No, it's not.
Well, yeah,
I'm
it is.
right, aren't I?
It is, because I just said you need to have something in place. You need to have something that ensures that people who potentially pose a threat to the country, we are dealing with this. But there are concerns that we have raised about the way this has been shaped and whether or not it will survive a test. The government thinks that it can ignore those criticisms, it can ignore the bipartisan parliamentary committee that recommended changes to it, and it'll just plough ahead with this. And as I said, it'll be interesting to see what happens, and will they pass a test if it goes to a legal challenge.
So, James McGrath, why did the government break what has been really a bipartisan approach to this issue? Why did you insist on this, particularly the ministerial power, when there is another path, and in fact the Joint Committee decided that there was another path?
Well, I can think of no one better than Peter Dutton, an ex-Queensland copper, to be the person making decisions in relation to returning foreign fighters. I don't accept your premise that we've broken any bipartisanship here.
Well, there was a committee and it made an agreement, Liberals were on it, you know that, Andrew Hastie chairs it, about amendments, and now the government doesn't want to pursue them.
And Andrew Hastie is very comfortable as chair of that committee with how the bill went through the House of Representatives today. I don't want to play partisan politics with this, but Labor either support it or they don't. They were dragged kicking and screaming to vote for it, like they did with the tax cuts and like they did with the drought aid. So I think that the ball's actually in Labor's camp, not in our camp here.
Okay, but this...
I think this government very much has stuffed this process up on national security, and as I've said elsewhere, Peter Dutton can't be trusted on this process. He took 4 years to put this together. There are problems in terms of the way this has been put forward, very sloppy in terms of this. There are other pieces of legislation that will be debated in the House of Reps shortly, where the security agencies on detention, for example, warrants and the way that people are held, have said we need to reform this system. The government's done nothing on it. Peter Dutton has been more interested in doing the numbers for himself last year, and during that period of time failed to get these type of things done right, and more the focus will come on the sloppiness and incompetence of Peter Dutton, as it should be. The government themselves, they play politics with national security, which should not happen at all, and they are breaking the trust as to whether or not they can be trusted on the safety of Australians because they keep playing politics with national security.
So on this issue, let me just ask a question, because that's how this system works. You've both actually personalised it. You've both made it a Peter Dutton, one of you saying he's wonderful and he's a Queensland cop, one of you saying he can't be trusted. But either way, actually, the legislation doesn't quite work like that. It doesn't say Peter Dutton in the legislation. It's about the minister. The minister can change, governments can change. Shouldn't it be looked at in terms of the law and the power to a minister, rather than personalising it like this? And I put it on both of you, actually, including you, James McGrath. I mean, you say he's a good Queensland cop. It could be anyone in that role.
Yeah, I need to go back to what Ed just said, actually, in terms of Peter Dutton. I think Peter's been probably the best minister we've had in this area in terms of making sure our borders are secure. So I strongly disagree with his analysis, if you want to call that, in terms of Peter's tenure as Home Affairs Minister and before that the Immigration Minister. I'm very comfortable with the minister, someone who was elected to Parliament to make these decisions. I'm particularly happy and comfortable that it is Peter Dutton, an ex-Queensland copper. I think he's done a brilliant job and will continue to do a brilliant job.
You haven't addressed my substantive question, which is it's not really about whether it's Peter Dutton because it's about.
Oh no, sorry, I did. I just said I'm happy with someone who was elected to Parliament as a parliamentarian by the people on their electorate or through as a senator, being appointed to this portfolio and making decisions on behalf of the people of Australia. I'm very comfortable with that. I'm just particularly happy it's Peter Dutton.
All right, let's park that one and move on to this one. It's been a huge issue this week. Starting with you, James. Do you think it's okay for Julie Bishop and Christopher Pyne to take up consulting jobs just months after quitting politics that, have a direct impact on the kind of work they used to do?
Oh, look, they've said, and my understanding is that they've complied with the statement on ministerial standards. The Senate are going to, because the Senate likes to do these things, the Senate is going to have an inquiry into it. That's a decision for Julie and Christopher.
Okay. Many of your colleagues, including in the party room, have raised, well, there weren't many in the party room, I want to be very specific and accurate, but others more broadly have raised concerns about how this looks. Let's talk about that famous pub test. Does it pass it?
Oh, look, well, when I go to the pub, it's, to have a few rums with my mates and talk about anything but politics. Look, both have said that they've complied with the statement on ministerial standards. That's what the ministerial standards is there for. I think leave it at that, and the Senate are going to have an inquiry into it. I don't think there's much more I can add to it.
Ed Husick, should the rules change?
Well, it'll be interesting to see what this Senate inquiry finds and whether or not they recommend anything. But it all boils down to this. Do you think firms of the kind that are mentioned would actually spend the money that they would on both Julie Bishop and Christopher Pyne if they thought that they didn't have something to offer? And that is the issue. What is being offered? And what is being offered is the contacts, the knowledge, the way things have run behind closed doors, and feeding that into those corporates. And I think most people will say, well, is this right that you can go from being a minister to someone in that role in such a short space of time? Clearly the rules thought this shouldn't operate this way, that there should be a gap and that there should be some distance. In this case, 18 months, I believe, is the requisite time that's been put forward, similar to what other jurisdictions, the concept of creating that air gap, as it was, between public service and private. And that's clearly what has got people thinking, particularly in the Senate, is not right, and has now forced them to the point of bringing on this inquiry because they're not satisfied with what the government's come down with through what was tabled in the last few days.
Just very briefly on the issue of wage theft, which has been dominating in the wake of the George Calombaris saga. I'll start with you, Senator McGrath. Do you think the government should really prioritise making this issue, criminalisation of wage theft, a priority?
I think we're focusing on other issues in relation to the industrial relations sphere at the moment. It's something that I personally, as a senator, would like to look into. But we've got a pretty full legislative agenda. So
the PM said he's open to it, though. He's not closing the door on it.
So for any worker who's been ripped off, you just heard it. Not interested.
No, I just said, no, hang on. I said, I'm not saying that at all. I'm saying we've got a pretty full legislative agenda. Happy to look into it. I'm not closing the door at all. That's totally incorrect to say.
And do you know what the agenda is? The agenda is we've got a vote on tax cuts today. For tax cuts that'll be delivered down the track. We've got a vote on drought relief today that won't be delivered for a year. We've got a vote on national security laws that took 4 years to get to us. But wage theft doesn't get a mention because, there's another political priority, and that is trying to basically beat up unions instead of looking at the employers who are ripping off workers, ordinary workers who deserve to have their wages paid properly, and that is not being, based on the Senator's response, you can see the government has a full agenda because they don't think this is something that should be high on the agenda, but all the politicking is.
James,
No, hang on.
I'll
I'm
give you
sorry.
a second
no.
chance. Do you think?
Yeah,
it
I think
should
I
be
need a
high on the
second chance
agenda?
there.
Oh,
I want to go
take it.
back to tax cuts, which actually started on the 1st of July. A record number of people have put their tax returns in because
Sure.
the tax cuts are
But
already
I'm going to
flowing.
take you back to wage theft, and you've got about 30 seconds. Do you think it should be a priority? Do you think employers that don't pay their workers the right amount, and in this case it was millions in the case of George Calombaris, should actually be dealing with criminal sentences, criminal issues, rather than just, $200,000?
Well, the Prime Minister has said he'll look into it, and I've said the same thing. But the government's got a pretty full agenda. We'll look into it. We want to make sure that we keep delivering these tax cuts for people, making sure our borders are secure, and we do deliver drought aid. I come from Queensland. There are kids in Queensland who, at the moment, have never experienced rain falling on their heads because the drought is that severe. So we've got to make sure that we get out there and deliver this to my fellow Queenslanders.
All right, we've run out of time, but it's always fun to talk to both of you. Fun, I use that very liberally. Thank you so much for coming on.
Anytime.
Thank you.
Labor MP Ed Husic there, and LNP Senator James McGrath.